Now listen. It's time to educate, here to communicate. Yes, it's our health at stake. My friends, don't be blinded. Oh no. They're taking over the land. It's time we make our stand. It's time you know about companies like Monsanto. Oh no, oh no. Polluting with chemical spray, poisoning waters day after day. Kamehameha school said they could stay because they pay our way, our way. Now look at the long-term effect when it's the land you neglect. The Ahupua's been a wreck and you're looking for your paycheck. Where's the respect? Where's the respect? Let's put our faith in the natural way. Forget the chemicals and your pesticide spray. Educate yourself for the children of today. Food grown organic and pure will always be the #1 cure. You'll all be grateful when you say no to GMO. Oh yes, no to GMO. Gotta say no.
Aloha mai kākou.
We trust you'll get this together, Charlie.
It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Environmental Caucus of the Democratic Party to this general membership meeting. Our focus tonight is the question of regulating pesticides, some of the difficulties that we have been finding working with that. This has become a popular issue, I think, both in an agricultural context as well as along the roadside maintenance and maybe some other ones that you might want to think of. We have three very distinguished, knowledgeable, and thoughtful people to bring their subject to us tonight. Starting with Tom Matsuda from the Department of Agriculture in the Pesticide branch.
All right.
Brings a lot of knowledge. Tom, you want to wait?
Yes.
We also have Gary Gill from the Department of Health.
Oh, yeah.
And we also have Kauai Councilmember Gary Hooser from Kauai. In addition, we have some other distinguished guests, not to mention all of the people in the public here who we really are targeting tonight. But I would like to mention that we have Senator Russell Ruderman with us tonight. And we also have the Director of Agriculture, Scott Henry. So if I've missed anyone, I hope you will speak up in time.
Yeah.
But, and of course, members of the public will hopefully speak up too. The format for tonight is I've asked each of the speakers to maybe give us about 15 minutes what it is that they would like to present to us for us to think about. Our purpose really as a caucus is educational. Our intention is to learn more about what's going on the subject and to maybe try to calm our thoughts about it, to open our minds and to listen a little bit back, take a step back so that we can step forward and think about these things carefully and maybe craft some solutions to figure out how to get from where we are to where we would rather be. So in that vein, I think we will start with Gary Hooser giving us some of his experience on Kauai. He's the author of a bill 690, was it?
2491 is a bill.
The bill was 2491.
960 is the ordinance.
960 is the ordinance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you. Aloha, everybody, and thank you to the Democratic Party, Environmental Caucus, and all the leadership. You guys have been doing some good work. I hear your name bandied about at the legislature and testimony, and I think it really makes a difference, though. The party and the caucus come out on issues, and so I commend you for that and encourage you to keep doing that. My name is Gary Hooser. I'm a member of the Kauai County Council, actually former chairperson of the Democratic Caucus, the Environmental Caucus. Thank you. I miss you guys. I served in the Hawaii State Senate for 8 years, and I was also, for a brief time, the director of the Office of Environmental Quality Control. And I'm going to just talk a little bit I've learned a whole lot this last year, more than I ever wanted to know about pesticides and GMOs and stuff like that. But I've learned a whole lot, and I think it'll set a little context from a community perspective and from a layman's perspective and a political perspective. And it comes about through our situation on Kauai. And I'm not going to get deep into the bill or deep into the politics or whatever, but I think it's important for context. So when I first got elected to the Kauai County Council, actually before that, as I went around the community, several people started saying, Gary, we're concerned about pesticides, we're concerned about GMOs, and it was real obvious to me that there was an increasing number of people who were concerned about this issue, people from all walks of life, people from north side, west side, east side, all ethnicities, older people, younger people, and I would jokingly say this is not just my North Shore environmental hippie friends. This is really an issue that has gotten to a point where I need to look into it more, and we need to do something about that. And so I started asking questions, and most of the concerns came related to the genetically modified organism, chemical companies on the west side of Kauai, Dow Chemical, BASF, DuPont Pioneer, and Syngenta. And they right now have approximately 15,000 acres on Kauai that they're doing crop experimenting, growing various things. And so I figured, well, I'll start here because that's where most of the concerns are based. And so I went to these companies, we gathered in a room like this, and there was 4 companies, and I said, people are concerned in our community, I'm trying to figure it out, it's my job as a council member. Could you help me out here and tell me what kind of pesticides, let's start with getting some good information, good data. What kind of pesticides, what kind of chemicals are you using? And they very politely told me, they weren't going to tell me. But very politely. And they also, when I persisted, they said things like, well, this is public information, go get it. And then they would say, well, we're only using what every other farmer uses. And I'd say things like, well, you're a chemical company, you're a pesticide company, you're a seed company, people are concerned you're experimenting with pesticides. And they said, no, we're not experimenting with pesticides. And so I went to the Department of Ag, and the Department of Ag was very helpful, and I did an information request as a council member and got all the data on restricted use pesticides. I discovered there's 2 primary groups of pesticides. One is restricted use pesticides, and one is general use pesticides. Restricted use are federally regulated, and you need to have the state law says, or maybe federal law says, people that sell those pesticides have to keep records of who they sell them to, how much they sell. So I got that list of chemicals and pesticides and found out a lot of eye-opening things. I found out, number one, that even though they said we're only using what every other farmer uses, no other farmer on Kauai was using anything close to what these companies were using. No other farmer. I had 3 years worth of data. 2 small farmers over 3 years used tiny bouts of a few of these. But besides Kauai Coffee, which used primarily one, it was these four chemical companies using 22 different kinds of restricted use pesticides. These are restricted use pesticides that are banned in many other countries. Syngenta, one of the main products that they developed is atrazine. Atrazine is banned in Switzerland, their home country. So these are really, this is bad stuff. And so I found out that they're using a lot of these, and the number I came up with, and the numbers can be argued, okay, I'll say that up front. I converted gallons to pounds, and it gets complicated when you start doing that, but I came up with 18 tons per year of restricted use pesticides. And then I started looking at, well, other people use pesticides too, so the county, we're spraying on the side of the road, and I found out, well, the stuff you spray on the side of the road is not restricted use pesticides. So the only other people really that use them to any extent would be termite companies who use primarily, I think, a single, some of the names are related, but it's primarily all the chemical companies, the termite companies use one, these big ag businesses use 22. Then people say, what about golf courses? Well, yeah, golf courses use a lot, so let's look at their golf courses. I added up all that data, and on Kauai we have 6 or 7 golf courses, and added up all the data on all the golf courses and came to 200 pounds of restricted use pesticides versus the 18 tons. So yes, they use it, but they don't use anything near the scale of these other companies. The county uses chlorine gas to purify water, and that is technically a pesticide. I learned it's a restricted use pesticide. Antibacterial soap is a pesticide, I think, by definition too. So you learn all this stuff as you go through. I learned that general use pesticides, nobody in the state of Hawaii knows how much general use pesticides is used in our state. Nobody knows how much Roundup is used here. The Department of Agriculture doesn't know. There are no records. There's no requirements for records. And so if you use standard formulas that many farmers use, if these companies are using 18 tons of restricted use, they could very well be using 100 tons of general use, year after year after year. And so I learned that, and I became more alarmed. The more I learned, the more alarmed, and the more information I asked, the more they wouldn't tell me. They said they weren't experimenting with pesticides, and then I found 2 experimental use permits that they'd had with the Department of Ag. And they argue over semantics. If you use a restricted use pesticide in a manner not approved by its label, you have to get an experimental use permit to allow it to be used on something else. It could be it's approved for use on apples and you want to use it on tomatoes. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but it still is an experimental use permit. And so as we went through this, I kept asking, what are you using? How much are you using? And to this day, the companies, we ended up passing a law requiring disclosure for the major users and requiring modest buffer zones around schools, hospitals, homes, and sensitive environmental areas like streams. And the companies are suing the County of Kauai. We have some very good lawyers. And we have the 4 largest chemical companies in the world suing Kauai County for the right to spray poisons next to our schools, and we're fighting it strenuously. Along the way, we interacted a lot with the Department of Ag and the Department of Health, and I was saying earlier that they kind of got caught in the crossfires a little bit. The battle really is between Kauai, the Kauai community, and these companies who are, in my opinion, not being good neighbors, not being forthcoming. But the regulators, Department of Health, Department of Ag, were brought into it, and I learned a lot there too. I learned that the companies would say we're highly regulated. And so I said, okay, let's see how highly regulated you are. And then so I started looking at the Department of Ag and finding out we have 1 person on Kauai, I think. Is that right? 1 person? And they're years behind in following up on inspections. And I believe this is statewide, that in terms of the under-resources, the Department of Ag does not have the resources to inspect, to follow up, and to do these types of things. And I believe the Department of Health is a similar situation. They do water testing, they do some testing, but they don't, in my opinion, do a comprehensive testing of soil, air, and water on a regular basis all the time. They just don't have the money, they don't have the resources. And they'll speak to that themselves, I'm sure. So maybe they're highly regulated, but they're not really. The companies are inspected maybe 6 times a year. Okay, they're spraying, tons and tons and tons, 5,000 acres, very, very strong, bad, highly regulated things, and they're not inspected very much at all, in my opinion. I got copies of the inspection reports and find that 43% of those inspection reports are redacted because they're violations that have not been resolved or cleared yet. And I don't know, and I've asked the question and not gotten the answer, whether these violations are, they didn't rinse the can out properly, because if you're disposing of a container of restricted use pesticide, there's ways to dispose of it. So it might be that type of violation, or it might be a violation of spraying in the wind, but I don't know. The reports don't say. When we met with the Department of Ag, and they were very cooperative and forthcoming, and I don't, they're doing the best they can with the resources they have. It's very clear to me. We would ask basic questions. Do you ever find evidence of drift? Do you ever find evidence of pesticide drift? Because that's what people are saying. They're spraying the fields, it's drifting on the school, on my house, people are getting sick. So we asked, do you find evidence or do you have complaints of drift? And the Department of Ag would say, yes, we do get complaints of drift. And then we say, what do? We go out and we swab the window, we take samples, and we send those samples out for testing. And then what? Is the public notified? No, the public's not notified until the investigation is closed till they've concluded what's what. So how long does it take to do that? And the answer is 2 to 3 years, sometimes. Okay, so because, and I think it's primarily because of the lack of resources. You know, obviously it's not. I don't think as a result of people don't want to do their job. They're just overworked. We're sponsoring, the Kauai County helped sponsor a bill that I've been supporting enthusiastically to provide significant additional funding for the Department of Agriculture. I'm almost, if I'm running too late, so let me know, I'm almost done. The Department of Health, again, came over and spoke to us, and it's very difficult, if not impossible at many times, to prove causality. You know, the whole Aaron Brockovich thing, to prove that this polluter is causing this person to have cancer or get sick. There's so many factors: cigarettes, drugs, electromagnetic radiation, genetics. There's just really, really hard to do, and lawyers and doctors and spend zillions of dollars, and often and the companies have more zillions of dollars than everybody else has, and so it's really hard to prove that directly. So I'm aware of that. I know my community has people in the community who feel like their health and the environment is being negatively impacted. There's no question about it. They believe their children are sick. They believe they have increased nosebleeds, increased respiratory illnesses. And we had a couple of doctors at KVMH who believe that we have a higher incidence, 10 times the national rate, of a rare heart defect in newborns. Okay? They said, we're not scientists. We haven't done a peer-reviewed long-term study. We don't know if it's pesticides or GMOs. We've been delivering babies in this community for 7 or 8 years, and the data we have seems to indicate that there's this 10 times the national rate. Okay? So that is alarming. For me, that's enough for disclosure and buffer zones. Okay? The companies would call this anecdotal. Well, and maybe it is anecdotal. It's enough for me. Apparently, I'm not a scientist, but the cluster theory, if you would. If you take a fistful of darts and throw it against the wall, you will have clusters of darts. Okay? That doesn't mean anything except it's a random cluster. So whether this is a random cluster or whether it's a cluster caused by these pesticides or GMO crops, I do not know. But I know people in my community, doctors who deliver babies, are very concerned. The Department of Health is looking into this. I've spoken to the governor and the director of health, and I'm happy to hear that they're taking this seriously and they're looking into it. The bad news is the state has a birth defect registry that, I don't know if it's law, it's a birth defect registry. Doctors are supposed to enter birth defects when the baby's born, and working, I think, with the University of Hawaii, Department of Health, they maintain this registry. It has not been updated since 2005. Okay? Again, it's not because people don't care, it's because budget cuts, it's about a lack of resources, and sometimes I think it's because of lack of awareness of the urgency. It's easy sometimes to discount these people are hypochondriacs, or maybe this is a crowd mentality, and it might be. I don't know. I know that we've had kids sent to the hospital on 2 or 3 or more occasions from one particular school, believing and thinking that it was exposure to pesticides. I know we've had thousands of sea urchins die off. I know we have people in our community that have children who believe they're sick from pesticide exposure. The doctors don't know what they're sick from. They have the fields across the street blowing on them every day, and these companies won't tell them what they're spraying. Okay? And so that, that's really what's happening on Kauai. There's a lot more to it, but that is kind of my education on pesticides, and they are directly related to these chemical companies, in my opinion, because they are the most egregious users. They use the highest quantities of these pesticides, certainly in agriculture, certainly in the open air. So we passed a law, they're suing us. We're hoping that we will win the lawsuit, and these companies will, at the minimum, disclose what they're using, and will stop using it next to schools, homes, and hospitals. And then we're also hoping that the state of Hawaii, the administration, will see the urgency and put the resources necessary with the cooperation of the legislature into the Department of Ag and the Department of Health to properly protect the health and environment of Kauai County. And I believe this extends throughout the state. And we're just on the leading edge, if you would, as an example of this. I have to say that I think there's more activity on Kauai County per capita in a smaller area of geography. There's also crops being grown on Maui, Molokai, and here. But it seems like there's more being done on Kauai. A side note on this, about a third of the land that these companies are using is state land, public land, ground land, ceded land, managed and leased by the Agribusiness Development Corporation to these companies. And so I believe that these lands have a higher level of accountability attached to them because they're public lands. So I'm going to stop right there, and I think the program is we let everyone else talk, and then we'll do questions later. Is that how it works? Okay. Thank you all very much for letting me talk.
Thank you very much, Gary. I know that was it's been a long road for you on that. I was just going to mention that when I became chair about a year ago, I started making the rounds of all of our executive committee members so that I could understand what your priorities might be, and one of them is on Kauai. And it happens that I've got a number of other friends who live over there, and they arranged to introduce me to a variety of people, which included some medical practitioners out on the west side. And so in the course of my travels around Kauai for a couple of days, they filled my ear with some kind of disturbing stories, so it kind of heightened my interest in it. And I'm very happy to have some really great people here to help us understand a little bit more how we can get at this in a way that's more satisfactory. But maybe Tom, you'd like to take the next run? Okay.
Thank you, Charlie. And all of you, thanks for coming out tonight. I'm not the Tom Matsuda that does the healthcare connector. So if you're here for him, you got the wrong guy. Yeah, my name is Tom K. Matsuda, and I am the Pesticide Program Coordinator. And last year, I got to interface with Councilman Hooser. We had a lovely time there. I feel my role is to educate you on pesticides and why it is so difficult to regulate. And it starts with you guys out here, believe it or not. I want you to raise your right hand, all of you. Go ahead, indulge me, and say, the label is the law. The label is the law. The label is the law. Okay. And I look at you guys and I say, you guys are all violators. Because as I go through my thing, I know at some point, when you use pesticides, you don't read the label. Am I right? Some of you guys raise your hand? Okay. Yeah.
You don't know what's wrong.
You don't know what, yeah. Okay.
They are.
You know, and just some comments from Councilman Hooser. EPA regulates the pesticide label, okay? Go home, find a bottle of Clorox. I want you to look for the EPA reg number. It's there. It's going to take about 5 minutes to find it. But again, how many of you, when you wash your clothes, use Clorox, or even clean your floors, read the label? You're in violation if you didn't read the label. Because a lot of times you have to wear proper PPE. Okay, how many of you sanitize surfaces at home, wipe down? You use Lysol sprays. How many of you guys read the label, just grab it and shoot it? You violated the label. Okay, and that's one of the problems. Guys do not read the label. The other thing is, we use pesticides, believe it or not, every day. The DOE people use in the cafeterias, when they sanitize the dishes, they're using pesticides. The state, the county workers, the state would be DOE folks, the custodians, they use pesticides. Department of Transportation treat right-of-ways, they use pesticides. The farmers use it. The pest control operators use it. If you've had your house fumigated, they're using sulfurylfluoride, which is a restricted use pesticide. You have a pet, maybe use some flea tick shampoo on it, you're using a pesticide. So what I'm leading to is why pesticide use, you get so passionate about it. You drink water, you want to know what's in your water, you get that report, you look for some levels, and you see something there, you get all alarmed. Okay. You can't help but get passionate about pesticides. The other thing is, if you want to grow organic stuff, already you're triggered. Don't use pesticides. You see large corporations, they're making millions of dollars. I got an axe to grind against them, and they use pesticides. That is why the use of pesticides is hard to regulate. Now, if everyone followed the label, I wouldn't have a problem, okay? As Councilman Hooser pointed out, yes, we are behind in getting our jackets completed, and it's not for not doing our work. We are inundated with a lot of requests for records. When that comes in, certain guys have to stop their work and they have to respond. They got like 10 days to get the information back or just respond back. And some people want information for the last 3 years. And what's involved is when we redact information, we say, okay, we're gonna blacken out this. It has to go to the attorneys on the other side. Then they send a response back. Yes, I agree. No, I do not agree. And then they say, I don't agree with you. We go back and forth. It takes time out from our staff. The word safe, when you talk about pesticides, is that in your mind? Pesticides gotta be safe? Zero tolerance? If you are a regulator, you look at the word safe, meaning below certain levels, there's standards, below tolerance levels that are established. So you look at the word pesticides as being safe, no risk. We look at pesticide use, there is some risk involved, okay? The other takeaway is the precautionary principle. The European Union uses this phrase, you need to show me that it is safe, otherwise you cannot use that. You got up this morning, you did not follow the precautionary principle because you don't know what's going to happen to you today, but you get up. The United States uses what's called risk-benefit. They look at the benefit of the product against the risk. The risk could be health, environmental, social, in terms of money, all this. They look at the risk-benefit. If the risk outweighs the benefit, a product does not get issued an EPA reg number. Okay, and again, we get to risk assessments. They do have the registrants and their people run the tests, okay? And those tests are sent to EPA to review. Can you imagine if EPA had to do all the tests, the number of scientists and all that? So what they do is they have the registrant say, and EPA does the protocol. They said, you report back to us in this format. You spend your money, you do all the testing, send it to us, we will review. Okay? Now, every 15 years, there is what's called a re-registration process. They review the atrazines, the glyphosates. If along the way, when it's re-registered, something pops up on the radar screen, they don't wait that 15 years. They start to look at that product right away. Okay, so we talk about risk assessments. The United States is risk-benefit. European countries are precautionary principles. You can visit the Hawaii Department of Agriculture website. We have the law 149A that kind of mimics the FIFRA, the Fungicide, Insecticide, Rodenticide Act, which is the Fed side. The Hawaii state law kind of mirrors that. We also have Chapter 4-66, the rules and regs. So you want to read up about how we kind of go down the middle of the road and enforce pesticides. Now, I'm not here to go one side or the other. I'll just tell you that we follow the rules and we enforce the pesticide label. You hear guys say, wow, they just spray whenever, any amount. According to the label, you can only apply certain amount per acre per year. So you say, well, who checks on that? Okay, a lot of the big companies they have it programmed in their spray applicators, and the fields are identified. And if they try and spray, I mean, that machine would say, hey, you've exceeded that amount, that dosage per acre per year. We've gone out, but it wasn't a big farm, it was a basil grower. And we've pulled records for about 1 year to see what was applied on the crops. We have that capacity by our law to go back and look at applications of restricted use pesticides. And again, general use pesticide, there's no requirement. However, big companies do keep track of general use. Okay, that's so they can kind of monitor what they do. There's another phrase, IPM, Integrated Pest Management. These companies use it at the Department of Ag. We're encouraging use of IPM in schools, and you're going to see that happening. And what that is to kind of monitor your pests before you apply any pesticides. And if you will apply pesticides, you probably look at safer products because pesticides cost money. Okay, so even you as a homeowner, you need to look at what is IPM. If you get roaches, ants, you want to clean up the place, sanitation, plug up any holes that say mice can get in. These are all IPM practices. If you hire a pest control operator, he'll come out, put traps, and it is just to find out the extent of your problem. Okay, that's just, it's called a survey. And then you determine your level, your threshold, how many ants, then you're going to spray something. How many mice before you spray something. Okay, IPM, it's been around in the 1970s and maybe even earlier. I went to school at the university, majored in agriculture. And back then, we were rah-rah about organic gardening, all that. I've taught principles of organic gardening, companion planting, all that stuff. This is back in the 70s. I'm kind of dating myself, all right? So it's starting to come full circle. We're talking about self-sustainability, and everyone's got to go organic. Again, there's room for every type of farmer over here. Okay. There's about 8,700 pesticides licensed in the state of Hawaii. Okay. And of that, about 230 are restricted use pesticides. If you are going to apply and purchase an RUP, you need to be certified by our department. And we also hold you to a higher standard because technically you're supposed to know better by reading the label and following everything that's on there. And I'll talk about drift. Impossible not to have drift. There'll be a few molecules that go off target. That's one of the biggest challenges. Again, regulators, drift occurs at time of application, shortly thereafter. Shortly is not a week later or 2 days later. Guy applies it, a few hours later, that's the best time to take samples. Because the longer you wait, how can we say, well, it came from that guy's application? Okay, even products that you sprinkle on the ground and it off gases, and someone files a complaint a week later, man, it's hard. Okay, as regulators do the interpretation. And again, I mentioned, who are the users of pesticides? You go to the mall, you have a pest control guy, cleans the place, probably sanitizing it. Sleep in a hotel, got bed bugs and stuff, they're treating with pesticides. You can go green, use heat products maybe. There's something called, the general use, restricted use, there's a third category called 25Bs. These are called minimum risk pesticides. Mint oil, peppermint oil. Anyone eat poke? Sesame oil. That's another minimum risk pesticide, believe it or not. Okay. So understanding pesticides is kind of technical, and I don't expect anyone to get this on the first go around. And again, we get so passionate about when we hear pesticides, it's going to cause this to that, and that's fine. But look at the EPA websites and Google the product, maybe glyphosate or atrazine that you're after. There's one other one called the NPIC, National Pesticide Information Center. That one I like to drive people to because they'll have a little alphabet up on top, A to Z. And you click on maybe A for atrazine, and basic information comes up. And if you want more technical information, there's another button. Okay, but at least those two sites start with that before you Google, and you get all kinds of information coming at you. I'll talk about our staffing pattern. There's only 18 guys statewide. I've got 5 enforcement inspectors. We had 6, one guy retired. I guess the heat got to him. Okay, there's only 2 on Oahu, 1 on the Big Island, 1 Maui, 1 Kauai. Okay, and these guys got to do about 8 to 10 inspections a month, and they do get to these large corporations. Now I said, well, is 6 inspections good enough? We inspect the certified applicator, okay, at least one time in their 5-year licensing period. We do not only do ag inspections with big corporations and small farms, and these small farms might be no restricted use pesticides. We also check on the pest control operators out there, the PCO guys. Right now there's about 400 farmers or private applicators that hold licenses for RUPs. There's about 1,200 applicators that hold licenses in the pest control industry. Okay, but right now, a lot of the emphasis is against the big companies. We have a neutral scheme, and we try and catch everybody. Okay, regulators, the Terminix, the diversified guys out there will come inspect them. And then we do have only one case developer. All those cases go to her. And like I said, when there's a UIPA request comes in, she has to stop her work. Not only that, information goes back to the AG's office. Very time consuming for her. I've got 3 education guys, 2 on Oahu, 1 on the Big Island. Their role has been stepped up to educate general public, but more importantly, to work with applicators to be sure that they understand the label. Anyone here of WPS, Worker Protection Standard? A couple of you? Okay. Rest of you haven't heard that? That's because you're not in agriculture, okay? If you apply a pesticide for farm use, right, commercial farm use, there will be a statement, Worker Protection Standard, and there are other conditions attached to this part. You got to have a decontamination site. If you get sick, the owner's got to take you to the hospital. You got to put these posters to alert the workers and the handlers where to go. They got to scrub up before they eat food. WPS. Why is that important on this label? Because either what we call a handler, the guy that mixes the pesticide and sprays it, or the workers that go into the field, these guys are exposed to pesticides more likely on a day-to-day basis than Javier driving down the road that he goes there once a month. Okay, so pesticides, WPS protect the guys that are going to get in contact with that. I'll talk about risk. What is the risk to you? Okay, we talk about toxicity of the product, the chemical in the air, and your exposure. It may be very highly toxic, but if you're not exposed, then what's your risk? None. Okay. If it is, you may get exposed more, okay, but the toxicity of that product is minimal, what's your risk None. You know, if we talk about a minimum risk pesticide getting on you, like, what's that, sesame oil? I mean, you're consuming that stuff. So you gotta look at the toxicity of the product and your exposure, okay? And again, WPS, one person on a different island says, hey, why the concern about the worker? Because that's the guy more likely to come in contact with that product day in, day out. There's also on that statement something called REI, restricted entry interval. Meaning if I treated this room with a product and there's a REI of 24 hours, that means no one should come back in this place. And employers will have to post that this field was treated, no one's to come back in. If you do have to come back in, that label will tell you you have to wear certain, I'll throw that word, PPE, personal protective equipment. And so you'll see these guys suited up, right? The label requires that. Maybe a Tyvek suit, or at least long sleeve shirt, long pants, shoes, socks, maybe a respirator. But again, federal requirements, you've got to wear this PPE. So don't make fun of, I'm using something and look, that Darth Vader guy, hey, he's protecting himself. Okay, if you follow the label, that is to minimize risk, minimize exposure, not only to you, but the general public. Bee kills. I went to the Big Island, and I just give some information. In the last 7 years, we've had 4 calls about bee kills here. Only one was attributed to pesticides, but then we couldn't find the applicator. Okay, the others, someone called, went over there, couldn't find any bees. They all flew off. The other one, up in Waialua, there were bees, not enough to sample, but what our entomologist found out was a lot of varroa mite had attacked that hive, okay, and American foul brood. So we're here, and I was talking to Javier about neonicotinoids. Anyone familiar? I see you waving your head. What is that? Synthetic nicotine. How many of you smoke over here? Who's guilty? I won't put you on the spot. It's a poison. Okay? So if nothing else tonight, stop smoking. Okay? That's a pesticide, how it's used. All right? And again, you know, everything's, you get passionate about organic gardening, organic farming. Nothing wrong, but don't stop the conventional guys. They're just using whatever tools are there, okay? I majored in agriculture at the university. I tried my hand in farming. Tough to do. I read stories about they're killing all the milkweeds in the field. You're darn right. Why? If you've ever farmed a weed in your farm, harbors insects, weeds compete for water, nutrients on your plants. And so that's why these farmers, they're gonna try to get rid of the weeds in the field. I love bees, and I'm trying to promote bee pollinator habitats. I wanna see schools do that. Maybe even the state and the county on some of these roadways that go down. Instead of mowing them, maybe plant some kind of bee pollinator plants. So that's what I'm looking at, and maybe Scott will help me with that. Even at our DOA, I said maybe we'll do some bee pollinator, but again, liability, big issue. What if someone gets stung? Turn around, sue the state. It's tough. Okay, it's like pesticides. We all, you know, we think differently, and that's what's unique about humans. Wrapping it up, and I'll entertain questions later on. Down at the ledge, just yesterday, we asked for 8 more bodies, and I'm not sure how that turned out. Were you there? Testimony?
We got 3.
What, 3?
And then Scott should know if we got the 8.
Yeah. Is that 3 or is that okay?
We're gonna get all the
Okay.
And we got 3 too, but it still has to go past the
Yeah, all the finance. Okay, so what that means is more inspectors. I'll have 2 on Kauai, 2 on Maui. I'll have 3 on the Big Island. I'll have 4 on Oahu. And I'll have dedicated education specialists on Kauai and on Maui. Now these guys, they also give exams, okay, and quizzes and stuff. But again, I ask myself, how much is enough? This pesticide question is so huge. You know, maybe if I had 20 guys on this island, but again, educating you here tonight, visit our websites, talk to 10 more guys about pesticide use, that we are all violators if we don't read the label. It starts with you guys. I'm trying to work in the elementary schools to educate kids, pesticide use, read the label. Okay, there's risk involved, but everything has risk in life. And with that, I'll turn it over to Gary Gill. Back to Charlie. Thank you.
Tom, thank you so much. You really got us started on a little bit of education there. It occurs to me that a lot of our pesticide use has been sort of a new convenience that has developed with the chemical industries. Everybody uses them and is not aware that we're probably exposing ourselves at our own risk. So it's really good for us to educate ourselves about all of this. And I think maybe as we follow this forum up, we may want to talk about that a little bit more. How do we educate the public? And I think Tom might be glad to come back, or some of his education folks come back, because this has been a really good start, I think, to help us understand what some of these issues are. So let's get on to Gary Gill. See what you have to say.
Thank you, Charlie. Sorry, Tom, I got to raise this up a little. Thanks, everybody. I'm Gary Gill. I'm the Deputy Director for Environmental Health, and I know we want to have a lot of questions and answers, so I'm going to try and keep this brief. We got a little bit of a late start. But the Department of Health is responsible for pollution control. The programs that I administer are many of the EPA programs: clean water, clean air, safe drinking water, solid and hazardous waste. We also do food safety and the state laboratory and emergency response. So we have a lot of expectations of us. When I think about this question of pesticides, it's been around a long time, and for good reason. I first want to say that for anyone who's concerned about pesticide or agricultural chemicals, their impact on the environment or on public health, that is a good thing to be concerned about. We have history in Hawaii where we are, as we speak today, still pulling some of these chemicals out of our drinking water. Things that have been banned historically, haven't even been applied for 20 years, are still being found in our drinking water. So before I say anything else, I want to encourage you and congratulate you for being concerned enough to come out and hear about this issue about pesticides. I think tonight the issue of pesticides probably started in recent years with concerns about genetically modified organisms. Right? There's lots of good reasons to be concerned about corporate agriculture and their practices. I could list a whole bunch of them, right? Wouldn't we rather be growing food for ourselves instead of corn for somebody else? Wouldn't we rather have small locally owned farms instead of outdoor, outside international corporations? What about the water use that goes with that? How about monocrops instead of multiple crops? So there's many, many reasons, food democracy reasons and policy reasons to be concerned about the use of our agricultural land in Hawaii. And how do we make sure that works for us as a state and as a community? So congratulations as well for being concerned about that. But when we get down to pesticides, it's something that is actually, as hard as it is to regulate, is probably easier to discuss and to define than some of those larger policy issues. And so I think that's, as the GMO movement or anti-GMO movement has evolved, it seems to recently have been starting to focus more on pesticide, the health impacts of pesticide, and labeling and consumer information. And those are good things because those are at least issues that we can deal with. And in some regard, we already have a regulatory framework for them. So to reiterate what Tom was saying, from the Department of Health standpoint, we have to protect the public health. And so when we're looking at these contaminants, of which there are thousands in use, chemicals, untested chemicals in your plastics and in your clothes and in your cosmetics. There's many compounds that have never really been tested. Very few chemicals have actually gone through any kind of testing, and the chemical laws that govern these chemicals on a national basis are kind of weak, and they haven't been updated in decades. So that's a good thing to be concerned about as well. Congratulations for being here tonight. But when we talk about public health, the impact of these chemicals, you are looking first and foremost on a pathway into the human body, and you're talking about the dose and the duration. Those are simple things to keep in mind to consider whether there may be a human health impact or whether something might cause harm or disease or some kind of toxic response. So the example I use often is lead. Lead. It's a heavy metal, it's a neurotoxin. Most people know, they didn't know maybe 100 years ago, but they know now that lead exposure can really inhibit brain development. It's very dangerous, especially for infants and pregnant women. Be careful how much pelagic fish you eat if you are pregnant, because that organic lead can get transferred into the fetus and can actually cause mental impairment in your kid. Lead, we're really concerned about it. Lead paint has been banned. Lead in gasoline has been banned. Right? So lead is bad. Each of us, except the two of us who rode our bikes here tonight, each of you drove a car to get here with 40 pounds of lead in the battery a few feet away from your body. And probably nobody was too concerned about it. Electric cars have even, depending on the battery, okay? Because there's no pathway for that lead to get from the battery into your body. So be concerned with it, but first and foremost, you have to establish a way that your body's going to absorb it. So one of those and how much it absorbs and over what duration. So for example, mercury, you can pass, actually the fish example was mercury, not lead, but same kind of issue. So mercury depends on the form. A metallic mercury, you could eat it and it would pass through your body and you wouldn't be able to find it in your body a month later. But if you eat a little bit every day, it's going to stay in your body and build up. You can't flush it out of your body as fast as you're ingesting it, then it might have a toxic impact. So those are the things you have to balance from a toxicological standpoint. So what does the health department do? We look at the pathways that these chemicals can get into your body. Are you drinking them? Are these chemicals in your drinking water? I can tell you, you know if they are or not, because the law requires the Board of Water Supply to send you a notice every year to tell you what has been found in your drinking water. It's the Consumer Confidence Report. They don't do it because they want to, they do it because the law requires them to. And there are more than 100 drinking water companies, private and public, that have to provide this information to you. They get that information because they have to test the water. The Department of Health, on behalf of the Environmental Protection Agency and state and federal laws, require that testing to be done, and it's done mostly at our state laboratory. So we know what's in their water, we know what's in your water, and we require the drinking water companies to tell you. And if we find anything bad above threshold levels, they have to clean it up. So water, drinking water is one way that you can, one direct way that you could get some of these chemicals in your body, and that is really, really strictly regulated. Another issue would be, well, are you eating it? So we have a program in the Department of Health where we test raw agricultural commodities. tomatoes, cucumbers, basil, green onions will go to the food distribution center or to a shopping center. We will take samples, we'll run them to the lab, we run them through a blender, we run the liquid through a very fancy lab machine, and we will get a report as to whether there are chemicals on those vegetables. Is there pesticide residue that's on the vegetables in your stores? Well, we don't do that as much as we used to because of the cutbacks. We don't do that as much as we would like. I'm asking the legislature to fund a new machine because ours is 20 years old. We had to borrow the Department of Agriculture's machine in our basement of our lab. And it's down now. Okay. So we need the tools and the resources to continue to do this. But what we have found, and by the way, we don't test seed corn because you're not eating seed corn. Right? So we are testing what's in the stores or the food distributors that goes for human consumption. Okay. So what do we find? Well, we found in this case that small local farmers are violative. They're breaking the law in applying pesticide on basil. That was in the news last year, the year before. 10 out of 13 farmers who are growing basil for local, national, and even international markets were applying a pesticide that they had no right to have. They had no one certified to spray it or apply it, and it wasn't supposed to be on basil. That's where we find the chemical concerns. Now, as I said, we're not testing seed corn because we're not eating seed corn. But when imagine if you were a hardworking local farmer and your crop was getting eaten by bugs, that's life or death for you, whether you'll be able to sustain your farm or not. And unfortunately, as I've said in the public, I'll repeat it now, the evidence is we have a black market on these pesticides. That farmer couldn't have bought it. He's not certified to buy it, but he got it. He couldn't have sprayed it, but it got sprayed. Somebody who had the authority to buy it, hopefully, unless they stole it, okay? Somebody who had the authority to buy it distributed it illegally to these small farmers. So I want you know, to keep that. Some of us think, well, you know, small is better than big, local is better than national. Well, here's one example where the small local farmers actually are clearly violating the law. And those, you know, at the risk to public health. So that's another thing that we do, Department of Health, we check. There's a third way that we're going to, with a concern about chemicals, and this is historic pesticide contamination from the old sugar plantations. So now we're talking dioxins, or arsenic in particular. So the sugar plantations used to spray lots of arsenic. It was the weed killer of the 1900s. And it didn't work very well over time, so they'd spray more. And so we still find in old sugarcane fields elevated levels of arsenic, which is like mercury or lead. It's a heavy metal with a toxic impact if you get too much. In dioxins, we'll go and we'll find on old plantation maps, they'll show a pesticide mixing area. So by the mill, there's a place where they would mix up all the chemicals, and that's most likely where it was spilled on the ground and where it may remain on the ground. So as an example, on Kauai, up in Kilauea, we had an old sugar mill that closed down in the 70s, was bulldozed, and now it's a residential community. And the Department of Health, with our great staff, I can't say enough about them, I've been going island by island to look for these places. We get an old map that says poison mixing shed, okay? And we overlay that map a Google Earth picture, which shows it's in this lady's backyard. So we go and test her yard and we find it high. And we work with the federal government to come in here. We dug out her whole yard, moved her soil out, brought in new soil, planted grass, cemented over the culvert, and it's controlled. The danger there from human exposure was not breathing it. It's if a young child were to eat that soil. Kids play in the mud, kids are small, they're they're closer to the dirt, they're likely to get dirt in their hands, and they're more sensitive. So the concern there was to make sure that no kids in that neighborhood ever in the future, for the next 1,000 years, were going to be exposed to that soil. And we go and we clean it up. This brings me to the question of what else is out there in the environment. So we've checked the water, we checked the vegetables, we look at historic contamination in the ground, but what is out there hurting the bees? What's out there hurting the fish or the urchins or whatever someone's suspecting? There's not a lot of data there. We have some special water sampling that we've done over time, watershed studies where we do pesticide examination. But at any given time, we don't know. But we're starting to know. Last year, a scientist came to town from Berkeley and he started talking about atrazine just before the legislative session. So I knew what was going to happen. I was going to get a resolution from the legislature to look into atrazine because, we heard about atrazine, it's dangerous. We got a resolution to look into atrazine and we did a study, it's on our website. Atrazine was sprayed for sugar, way more. Tom, you have those numbers, right? But historically, atrazine was put all over on all the islands in sugar plantations. It's only mostly being applied on Maui now, because that's the only place where sugar still is growing. It's being used on Kauai to a far less extent than it was 20, 30 years ago. But atrazine persists when it hits the groundwater table, and we can find it in the groundwater, and we're finding it mostly on the Hamakua coast. So we did this report, we did this assessment of all the data, and it's public information if you'd like to look at it, it's on our website. But we didn't want to just stop at atrazine because there's 100-something chemicals that are pesticides. So we have just completed, working with the Department of Agriculture and USGS and some of our own emergency response money, we did a statewide scan of surface waters and soil to determine what is out there. All the nicotinoids and all the chlorpyrifos and the EDBs and the DDC, and all these chemicals that I can't even remember, including Roundup, glyphosate. We have data in 30 to 35 locations across the state where we went to sample what is in the environment. From large monocrop corporate agriculture, golf courses, anklet ponds, mixed, diversified small agriculture locations, urban locations, and we're just getting that data back in from the lab, and hopefully we'll be able to get at least a preliminary report to the legislature so that we're not talking about rumors, but we're talking at least we'll have a one-time snapshot of what's in the environment. It's not every month, it's not every week, it's not every season. We just took one-time snapshot, but hopefully it'll tell us if there's a problem and where there's a problem, if there's a problem, to focus some more. So I wanted just to close by saying the pesticide application regulation is a Department of Agriculture regulatory function. And this is true across the United States. It's not just in Hawaii that the Departments of Ag do this EPA program. Most of the EPA programs are me and the Department of Health, except the pesticide program, which almost universally, as far as I know, across the nation, is administered by the Departments of Agriculture. But when we find something, we find a cucumber that's in violation, it's the Department of Agriculture and us working together to figure out what farm it came from, to go and talk to that farmer, to investigate his pesticide use. If we find it, we tell them. If they're going through a farm and they find something in the farmer's shed they're not supposed to have, they tell us, and we work together to respond. It's great news you're going to have more people to work on this issue, because it has been underfunded and defunded recently in the past. But this administration is bringing it back. We're getting more resources, more equipment, if we can get the legislature to approve it, to pay closer attention to these serious problems. So that was longer than I wanted, but I want to have time for questions and answers, and thank you again for being here tonight.
Thank you very much, Gary. I really appreciate your making a presentation for us. You know, it was interesting to me that I've been at this for a long time too. I work for the state with the Water Commission, and so we have a lot of these concerns coming about water and so on we wanted to look into, and the Department of Ag has been very helpful, and Gary's department has been very helpful. One of the things that I wanted to mention was not only are all of us to some extent culprits in the problem, but a lot of the damage was done kind of before our time. And all of us who are here today, I'm looking around and seeing a few younger faces, but we've all been around for a while. We're part of this environmental movement that has raised awareness. And it's nice to see that we have some real partners, people who care about this like we do and are taking a conscientious view of their responsibilities. So I look forward to being able to kind of move this agenda forward a little bit for us all to learn a little bit more how we can be part of the solution. So I was first going to ask if any of the panelists had a kind of a nice question for one of the other panelists to kind of get us thinking about how we can approach this question. Yeah. Yeah.
I had a question. Thank you very much for the presentation, both of you. The precautionary principle, that's pretty appealing to me, actually. Part of the process on Kauai was taking public testimony, and one particular person testified a situation. I was on the mainland. They lived next to an orchard, and every day they're fumigating the orchard, and over and over again. She had a small baby, and her testimony, I'll never forget it. She says it was safe until it wasn't. Okay, it was safe until it wasn't, and you know, that just resonates with me, whether it's DDT or whatever, tobacco. So my question is a precautionary principle. It's my understanding that the Clean Water Act, which I believe governs sewage outfall, the federal standards, the state can have stricter standards than the federal government does. And so what is to prevent the state or the various departments or agencies to take a more aggressive approach and use the precautionary principle or have stricter regulations than the federal government's regulations? Thank you.
I'll let Tom talk about how the state can be more strict than the federal government in pesticide regulation, but it is true in terms of the Clean Water Act and our water quality standards. For example, that the state must be at least as strict as the federal government, but we can, and in fact we do have stricter standards in many of the things that we test for than the federal government does. That kind of works both ways. For example, we have a water quality standard for enterococcus, which is supposed to be an indicator of human sewage in the water. So the whole nation has to check, you know, how much enterococcus there is to see if it's meeting that standard. But the body of science is coming forward now that it's really a lousy indicator in tropical areas. Enterococcus is like everywhere. It's in the sand. It's, you know, it's not. We'll find it, and we do find it everywhere. And it doesn't indicate sewage much at all. So, you know, those standards are always evolving and growing with new science. But still, you apply. We try to apply, we're mandated by law to apply the best science possible. So when you talk about the precautionary principle, I think you need to be kind of cautious because, and I'll just use an extreme example to try and illustrate this. And I mean, it's a real example, but I get calls. I never know what's going to happen when I'm at work at 7 o'clock and the phone rings and I go like, oh God, should I pick it up? Okay. Because it's usually somebody calling the Department of Health for some complaint. Who would call the Department of Health at 7 o'clock? We're not supposed to be there, okay? Stupid me, I'm there. Okay, so, and I think I'm being harmed by, fill in the blank, moonbeams, ray beams, what I saw on the internet, something. Those are things that we won't ever be able to prove. Right? 200, 300 years ago, what made people sick, the modern science, was vapors. Maybe when Tony was in school, it was still vapors, right? Okay. Yeah, okay. So, things had vapors. It's before we had microscopes and knew that there were such things as microorganisms, right? So we have to apply the best science, and as it applies to the really tough problem of combinations. Okay. So this pesticide is tested, that pesticide is tested, but we never tested the combination of the two together. There's thousands of combinations possible, millions of combinations possible, right? You'd never really be able to know for sure, but if you were to apply a strict precautionary principle, if you don't know, don't do it, we wouldn't end up doing anything. So you have to apply the best science that you can, the best toxicology that you have in the environment where things are evolving and science is expanding on a daily basis. We have, just this Monday I saw a tool I never even knew about, XRF, X-ray fluorescence. It's like a little ray gun, and you put it on the ground and it can tell you how much lead and arsenic is there in real time. And we're like, wow, that's cool. I didn't even know about it, right? But these things are being evolved now, and we're using these tools. So I guess, science, we have to do our best to inform and provide facts and interpretation to combat fear, the fear of the unknown. Because there's always going to be that unknown. And we have to take our best guess at it. And I'm lucky that, I don't claim to know anything about any of this stuff. I'm just a hotel toilet scrubber. That's where I came from. But I have a whole department full of PhDs and scientists who've spent their life focusing on these issues to protect the public health. And this is a tremendous resource that you all have in your state government that needs to be supported and sustained. When it comes to pesticides and new chemicals or stricter standards, Tom, I don't know if you wanted to address that.
Yeah. Geez, Gary, thanks. Oh, okay. Real quick, if you look at our, I think it's 4-66, there's a list of state-restricted active ingredients. And then we also, when we have new chemicals coming out, we have contracted with the University of Hawaii to see if these are possible leachers. So in a sense, that could be a precautionary principle. Depending on our island versus on the mainland, the UH will run, well, first we run a matrix, give it numbers. And if it seems like it's a possible leacher, we send it to the University of Hawaii. They run tests. They come back, yes or no. If it is a possible leacher, we can put it on state restricted. We also need information, say from EPA or other credible sources that say this product is causing either an environmental problem or a human health problem. Then we'll look at that. But we can't go on someone just saying, by the way, I feel sick. We need more documentation. But we do have a mechanism to look at chemicals.
When you say leacher, you mean leaching into the
Groundwater. Yeah. And again, the soils are all different on the islands. Volcanics in there, we have the clay soils, sandy. So again, we'll look at where it's going to be used.
Do you have a question?
I have no questions. I am the messenger. But they can reach me anytime if you've got these hard questions going back and forth. Again, I feel we're all in this together. If we can educate the general public, number one, and kind of what happens in the court, happens in the court. But again, we're just a phone call away. And if I've extended that to the other Kauai Council members, there's some questions, let me know. And same with Gary. Our departments work real close together.
So,
Where's the burning question?
I think it goes back all the way to my grandmother. And she said, when she gets vegetables, you take a little bit of bleach, and you put the bleach in the water, and then you wash it in the bleach, and then you spray it with another wash of water, and then that's supposed to be the safety thing. Now, is there anything to that?
Yeah, that's sanitizing. Okay, but I'll share with you, people say bleach, and they'll say
Peroxide?
hydrosodium chloride, the stuff in Clorox, okay? So, yeah, same active ingredient, the labeling is different. One is a pesticide, one is not, okay? If you use bleach, it's not a pesticide. I'm not gonna enforce anything on that. If you use Clorox, and there's a label on Clorox, you can go online. I don't know, it's about this tall, but you can use it to disinfect fruits and vegetables, even your drinking water. If we had a tsunami and you had lousy water, you could use that.
Now, you need Clorox or?
No, it's the Clorox. The Clorox will have this long labeling.
Right.
Yeah, to sanitize water and drinking water.
Okay, so the question is, does that do something, right? And what that does is it prevents you from getting, salmonella or E. coli contamination. That's what it is. So it's going to kill any living microbes that could be a pathogen. And that's why people do it, especially in third world countries where you don't know what was put on the soil. It might have cow manure or human feces or something as a fertilizer. So you'd be concerned, although that's organic, you would be concerned that the pathogens might stay on the fruit. And that's what happens typically from melons from Mexico. Right? If you don't wash the outside, get the dirt off the melon, you cut it, the knife takes the contaminant, the microbe, into the melon where it has a happy life, enjoying the melon that you would, and then you eat that and you get sick. Okay? So that's an example of a kind of a pesticide use which is used to be protective of public health, like you chlorinate your swimming pool. Okay? I think you kind of want to go to the public pool when there's enough chlorine to protect you from that kid who just got out.
Right. Well, it's both adults, I think.
Right.
It's just a thing.
Okay. Do you want to handle the questions?
I have a question. My question is about, we were talking about washing, like the produce, and you were talking about that melon. So if you just can you washing it with water is going to be efficient, or you have to use some other soap or something? I see things on television about using other chemicals or something to wash it off to make it more edible.
Well, I think this actually gets into food regulations because, and this is food safety, which is another part of the health department that comes under my administration. For example, if you have a roadside stand, you're a farmer in a rural island somewhere, and you put up a little shed by the road, and you sell your mangoes and your avocados to the cars, the tourists who go by. Perfectly good. You could pull out a head of lettuce from your backyard and sell that. But as soon as you cut the fruit, or make a smoothie, or make a salad, you need to do that in a commercial kitchen. You need to have the vegetables washed, you need to have the process, you have to have hand washing sinks, you have to have potable water. And the reason being is that people have a reasonable expectation that when they buy an organic salad or anything on the roadside stand or anywhere, that it's been produced properly in a sanitary environment. If you sell them a mango or you sell them a head of lettuce, they ought to know to go home, wash it before they make a salad. Okay. So, yeah, washing your produce to remove any of the dirt, because the dirt is what's likely to be having the pathogens on it. So get all the dirt off. You don't need to chlorinate it necessarily. That's an added precaution. But it really sort of depends where it came from.
This is a follow-up question to the same. I have brought with me a study in the American Academy of Pediatrics. I did a study which clearly says children and pregnant women are at greater risk of pesticide impacts.
Yeah.
And one thing that really amazed me when I read the study, because it follows up on Tony's question, was they took a group of children out of school, I don't know, 30, 40 children, and they tested all their urine, and virtually all of them had pesticides in their body. So virtually all of us will have pesticides. And then they took the same group of children and put them on an all-organic diet, very strict diet, and then within, I think, 3 weeks, the vast majority of the pesticides left the system. And so I know you test, but I just want to make the point, if you agree with me, that we all are ingesting these things, even if we wash our fruit and vegetables. And the question, if you would, is about levels of tolerance, and that's where I come back to the precautionary principle. You know, that it's troublesome for me to have an acceptable level of atrazine or acceptable level of glyphosate. I don't want any, it wasn't there before. And so I would much prefer a more stricter approach, and I think the people I'm talking to in the community are becoming more aware of this every day and want a cleaner diet, and they want a better diet. And so if it was possible for the Department of Agriculture or the Department of Health to enable our, us to be healthier or have lower tolerances, because as we know, every year or so, the pesticides and chemicals are reclassified. And they may go up or they may go down. We may be eating or consuming a level we think is safe today, and then tomorrow it's not. And so I would really just ask that the department, the administration, look at utilizing those standards.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so the first point is, do we all have this stuff in our bodies? And generally speaking, human beings in the industrial age have created all kinds of compounds that didn't exist in nature. There's plastics, synthetic rubber, everything that we're wearing, aluminum cans, the plastic coating inside the aluminum can. So the earth is a sponge, and we are sponges on that big sponge, and every one of us has trace elements of these chemicals in us. PCBs, which are lubricating oils. The seals in Alaska have them because it's in the environment. It's carried by the wind and it's carried in the ocean at little amounts. We probably have radiation from the bomb that dropped on Hiroshima too, right? Because that stuff, to the extent that the half-life is, dozens of years, there's little molecules still floating around. The question is, when does it have a toxic impact? Okay, and that's where you can't necessarily say that the absence of a little bit versus nothing really has a different health impact. And so, there's a whole, seminars that could be that I'm not prepared to express about this question, but it gets back to the point of how much is a toxic impact. And I'll give you just an example to illustrate how hard it is to do this. There's a metal called selenium. Has anybody heard of selenium? Okay, so it's on the periodic table. 10 years ago, I'd never even heard of selenium, except HECO found some in their settling pond at Kauai power plant, and it turns out that selenium is listed as a hazardous waste. So they self-reported, they went out, they barreled all this goop, they shipped it off to a hazardous waste dump. And if you go to a health food store, you can buy selenium tablets that are supposed to help your eyesight.
Wow.
You can do it right now. Go to a health food store and get selenium. All right, so
That's the same thing with chromium.
chromium is a nutrient. You need to have a little bit.
But it's different. Chromium 6 is the most smart, extremely toxic. And we are supposed to be number 2 in the nation. And when we ask about where is it coming from and what are we doing about it, it's in our water.
Yes, it is.
It's Aaron Brockovich who discovered all of this. There's been a film about it.
Yeah, careful what you see in Hollywood, though.
No, but we're number 2.
Right. It's good. It's a good point. I'd like to address the chromium issue too, because that one came up a couple of years ago. The Environmental Working Group did a little test and found, unusually from a national standpoint, high levels of chromium in, I think they took a tap off of somebody's house in St. Louis Heights or something. That's all reported. All that data is available to you. We have standards for chromium. There is no industrial waste dump that's contaminating our drinking water in Hawaii with chromium-6. It exists naturally in the volcanic rock.
Have we tested the military?
Yes, we have. Yes, we have. We test all that drinking water. And you know where the most chromium is? Just to put this point, just to make more trouble for Councilmember Hooser, the highest chromium levels in drinking water is on the island of Kauai, because it's the oldest island, and the volcanic rock is older there, and the natural elements that are in the earth, like chromium, can be leached out of the Kauai soil at a faster rate than the young lava on the Big Island.
So the tests have actually been done to determine that, because things come organically from the earth, like radiation, but then we also do what we do with radiation, you know, when we take the plutonium out and we do what we do with everything, it's so toxic, and then we are killing ourselves and everything else. But it is natural in Mother Earth, and the native people would say it's a wonderful Mother Earth, and we leave it there, because that's where it's supposed to be, and it has a function. So I would like to see studies that really show, I'm not with you, I'm telling you,
Yeah.
I hold a lot of feelings in about a lot of things, so it's not towards you. I'm
Sure.
very frustrated that I find there's two things I'd like to do for the thing, which are the questions. One, something's not scientifically, viable, according to certain scientists, because other scientists, like you, certain scientists, or other groups, or other people, find in their studies, and their scientists as well, but the other group doesn't think that's scientific enough, just like you're not native enough, or Jewish enough, or black enough, or not enough, or anything, right? So it's the same kind of idea that suddenly the studies that people are doing that are scientists, by some people's standards, or other scientists, they don't like what they're coming up with, it's no longer scientific. So when this chromium-6 issue and chromium-3 has been discovered here, everything I've read, because I'm doing a lot of research about it, and it really is one more kind of insult to injury, it's potentially causing agents in our drinking water, and we tell our children and our future generations to be thinking about. And I like everything that I'm finding is there hasn't been any real studies that are focusing on where it's coming from besides you. And in other places it wasn't coming from you. I still feel that studies need to be done.
Sure. So, well, the cool thing about Chrome-6 is it does have an industrial application, and if you read or watch the Aaron Brockovich movie, there was a direct link from the chrome that was put in to prevent the rust of the pipes at this industrial plant, had a settling pond, which the Chrome-6 went into, and then you could at least argue that it went from the settling pond into the groundwater and into people's drinking water. That's not the case in Hawaii. It's just not the case. We don't have in all of our drinking water wells, which are all over the island, they're not right next to somebody's industrial plant that injected chrome-6 into the earth. So it is there naturally. It just
I
is.
guess people are, like myself, are suspicious because in general, because all of these other pesticides are allowed to be in water, the water and the earth and always through the air, and they keep raising the levels of what's acceptable. And yet,
Actually not.
because you got people who have different tolerance. So for some people, that could be a person, they could quickly have a
Right.
situation where another person maybe wouldn't. And
It's a good point, because people are all individuals. We have our different genetic makeup. Some are more sensitive. Some people are chemical sensitive. Some people aren't. So it's difficult from a public health standpoint. I think as was Gary Hooser said early on, when you throw the pack of darts at the wall, you get a cluster naturally. It's hard to find that cause and effect to any illness. And that's especially difficult in Hawaii. Our communities are small. If we find there's 10 people sick in Hilo, that's statistically so small that you can't draw a real scientific conclusion from it. To really come up with a toxicological study that's going to sustain scientific scrutiny and peer review, you have to follow hundreds of people through dozens of years and sample everything that they're exposed to come up with some kind of conclusions about what might be making them sick. And so it's just really nearly impossible to come to conclusions.
I'm sorry, I want to interrupt.
Maybe after the meeting.
I would like to follow this up. This is a good conversation, but there's 3 other people who've been begging for a chance, and so if I could start on this side. I'm sorry.
I just have a quick question. What's the bill number to increase your funding that you're trying to?
Inspectors, or the inspectors for the tax.
Is it a budget item?
We had testimony yesterday already.
What's the bill number?
SB 2110.
There we go. SB 2110.
Yes, yeah,
That's for the framework.
SB 2110.
But then also the machine.
Oh, for
He needs a new
lab.
machine too. What's that one?
Yeah,
Oh,
we need a testing machine.
the budget bill
Oh, yours?
has a line item for equipment for our state laboratory. So it's part of the state budget bill. And the House approved it and the Senate denied it, so it's going to go to conference and we'll roll the dice and see if we get it.
And then SB 2110?
Yeah.
That's a different bill, that's not the budget. The budget is separate.
Yeah, that's
This is just regarding the license fee and the washing things and making them clean. License fee cannot be washed off, cooked out, anything like that. This is only what Mr. Hooser said. So if they're applying more and more and more, the worms have become, the super weeds and things, and now the worms are starting to eat the corn. And so now the EPA is about to approve the 2,4-D, which is the compound in Agent Orange.
Oh, no.
So now this is what we'll be consuming. So again, I'm assuming that this won't be washed off or cooked out. So when does it stop? And when does it become a health hazard or issue for us, and more importantly, our children, our grandchildren? And it's not only that, it's what it does is it stays in our bodies and it affects our reproductive system, and we're passing it on to our children and our children's children. And it's affecting, we're seeing birth defects, and whether or not it's being recorded, like Mr. Hooser said, whether they're putting it in the registry or not, because they're behind. It's written somewhere on a piece of paper, whether or not we're behind to 2005. It's still somewhere in a record, and whether you're skewing it by including an entire island and not just the west side of Hawaii, and you're seeing professionals that have been doing this their entire life and are delivering children and are seeing a spike. I think that's what you have to listen to, not statistics that are being skewed because they're saying, oh, we're going to include north, south, east, and west. Not just
The health question.
Okay.
So that's it.
Yeah, glyphosate persistence. From the information I read, the information I read on glyphosate, it binds tightly to the soil. Now, if you're getting it on your crop, and maybe it's soybeans, you have glyphosate resistant, that'd be a feed type.
To feed the cattle and the things that people eat.
It'd be on the outside. And basically, they shoot it to kill the weed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you talk about super
But
weeds,
it's still in the soil coming up through the
it binds to the soil. Okay? Now, check the NPIC website.
Can I just ask one question?
Okay.
Just and then I won't say anything else.
Yeah.
So if I were to check my shishi, I might be able to find some glyphosate in my shishi, correct? If I was exposed. No, I wouldn't.
If you were exposed,
To glyphosate, it might be in my shishi.
could be your level of exposure. Okay? Yeah.
All right.
But again, when you say glyphosate,
But now I'm talking
no,
about that they're
there's,
starting to fail, and now they're going to put 2,4-D.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
I'm concerned about that too. Okay, but when you have super weeds, that means they're gonna look for other products, maybe more toxic. But we'll talk about glyphosate. There's salt formulation and acid formulation. Okay, when you look at the product, the active glyphosate by itself, the literature I'm reading is not as toxic. It is the inner ingredients in the product, the carriers. Okay, a lot of guys just say glyphosate, no good. You need to also look at the inner ingredient, and that's where a lot of this AMPA, the AMPA, you're going to start reading about that. There is concern about that active ingredient, but again, go to the NPIC website, read up about glyphosate. Okay, again, a lot of guys, they get the sound bite and they go crazy. Whoa, 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 slow down, educate. Go to the EPA website, punch in EPA.gov glyphosate, EPA.gov atrazine, okay? Yeah, I read a lot too. Yeah, because I've got to answer these questions.
My name is Naomi Carmona.
Hey, Naomi.
And thank you so much for coming, everyone. I really appreciate, and I can't wait to see the results of the sampling that you've done. I appreciate you taking that initiative. And definitely feel like the EPA approves toxic products banned in other countries all the time. So I personally consider the EPA standards not to necessarily be a ceiling for Hawaii, especially since we have so many more growing seasons than the rest of the country. I think it's something to really be looked at too, but I have a lot of farmers who would debate that there's even more than 2 a year, but that's neither here nor there. I have a couple of questions. Would you have any rulemaking power to do anything about some of the pesticides that are being used? Say, for example, the Roundup that includes glyphosate that's causing all these Roundup-resistant weeds and bugs, or glyphosate-resistant weeds. Would you have any bureaucratic rulemaking power to say, hey, as a state, we don't want to have a bunch of super weeds, so Department of Ed, we're going to say, you know, we suggest a moratorium, or we place a moratorium, or something like that. And not, I'm just using Roundup as an example. That's my first question. My second question, I've been looking at the requirements for spraying instructions in different states compared to Hawaii. So maybe you can clear it up for me. I'm looking at alfalfa, for example, being sprayed with Syngenta's gram zone. So if I look at California's rules, they're crazy. They're like
Yeah.
several pages.
Yeah.
You know, don't harvest until 40 days after application, maximum 2 per year, don't apply with weather conditions, ground equipment, like very, very specific instructions, don't enter within 24 hours, blah, 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 it goes on and on and on. Must be labeled as it goes through processing, blah, blah, blah. And if you look at Hawaii, I'm looking at the alfalfa instructions for granazone from the Department of Agriculture in Hawaii, and I must be misreading this because while it has a lower minimum total spray per acre, which I appreciate, the only 3 instructions for no-till and conventional planting of alfalfa for this chemical are applied prior to the emergence of the crop. Crop plants emerge at the time of application will be killed, and seeding should be done with minimum amount of soil disturbance. So, is that a real discrepancy? Am I missing something? And does COA have the power to set instructions like this different on a state-to-state level where it might not be so basic to just read the federal label? Because to me, what I'm looking at looks like the instructions from the California Agriculture Department are way more strict than Hawaii. And is that true? And if so, can we change that?
Okay, that label that you're reading, is that the EPA? Because a lot of them will have EPA labels, and then they'll have certain states, these conditions apply in that state. It's not our label, okay?
It might be, maybe it's something that we could sit down and look at
A lot of
together,
the
but
labels will have different states. If you go to New York, because of their groundwater concerns, they will say you can't use this product at all.
right, so there is different.
Yeah, but it's again run by EPA, not us. Now, unless there is a concern, as I mentioned earlier, a leacher, okay, we can put conditions on it, all right?
So what would establish a concern to you?
Human and health risk and environmental concerns. Understand that states vary their topography, the conditions, okay? So that plays a lot in restricting certain pesticides to that state.
So do you think that people, like citizens, just need to be much more active in formally writing down their concerns? Because I know we have a lot already.
Need more than that. Gotta have some scientific data to say.
There's a lot right now coming out about glyphosate in particular. So if it's more formalized, directed to you, I mean, like, at what point do you have to do something?
EPA.
Right, but you're saying you do have the power to change something.
Yeah, but it's gotta be really concerned.
Well, we are really concerned.
Yeah.
I think we have that. I think you've answered the question. Thank you.
I have pretty much the same concern that Nomi had. I guess it's just the shelf after shelf of these pesticides that I see at Home Depot and the lack of weeders that are available. I'm taking a Master Gardener classes now, and the professor went through the entire, weed control lecture without mentioning the word weeder. I couldn't believe that, but it was true. But to his defense, he did have a black plastic type of thing to control weeds, so there was a little bit on that side. But my concern, if you say that the problem starts with us and we're not reading the label, and these pesticides are just available, just go get it off the shelf, and you don't have to read the label, and we are allowing those pesticides to be used in this state and every state of the union, in any way that a person sees fit, to spray little cracks in the sidewalk with it, to be used in all kinds of, to be misused in all kinds of ways. And that's where I feel like the state, if they could have power to do more than what the federal does, could take it upon themselves to say, we're deciding that is, that is in all of our soils, whatever it is, if it's glyphosate or if it's other, pesticides or whatever, that we really, take the bull by the horns here and say we're going to do something about this because we realize that there's just too much overuse and misuse of these chemicals.
Again, this topic, when I started my whole presentation about how emotionally pesticides are, and am I right that, because it comes to lifestyle. You see these guys spraying on the roadways and even at home using Roundup. Why is it so readily available? Because it frees up people's time. Would you spend 5 minutes shooting and then taking off to the beach or go shopping? These are the choices people make, okay? Great for you to spend 5 hours weeding at home. That's your lifestyle, your choice. The other thing is educating people. If that's what they want to do, great. Yeah.
State taking maybe more responsibility on that education, or in ways that would then say, hey, the alternative is.
Oh, yeah.
That it isn't just
Yeah.
safe as water is the way it was explained at one time.
IPM, remember that word, integrated pest management, about using other alternatives before you use pesticides? We're trying to encourage that with the kids. Because when they grow up, at least there be more akamai, right, on the choices and their lifestyle.
Right.
Okay? So that's the other piece, the IPM, and that's not only for farmers, pest control operators, it's the homeowners and the kids. And so that's one way, in a sense, kind of going green. Yeah.
If I could comment on that too.
Okay.
I just want to comment on that if I could. It's an observation and it can be treated like a question, but in my experience, there's this disconnect at the state level between who's responsible for what. Quite frankly, the Department of Ag works very closely with the farmers and with the people that use pesticides. And the Board of Agriculture is made up of farmers and people, big landowners, and the Department of Health does their thing. But in my opinion, no one has taken ownership of the pesticide issue as it becomes real relative to health. I think there's this overlap that is not clear in terms of the distinction between the two agencies and who's really, so should it be the Department of Health up here saying we need to lower these pesticide levels? Or should it be the Department of Agriculture who's managing pesticide levels to make that decision? I would argue the Department of Health, but I think right now it's not clear cut. That's just my observation.
Very, very. I think the same thing at the federal level, just with the BT corn being called a pesticide, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not called a food product, so it's not regulated by the FDA, it's regulated by the EPA.
Right. Thank you. I don't want to let other people speak. Yeah.
I'm over here because Pono says the other mic is giving feedback. So if you have a question, it's probably good to come up here and ask. This is for Tom. How many different restricted use pesticides are used in Hawaii, and who is the biggest user? And then my second question is, if 56% or more of state ag lands are leased to biotech seed companies, how much is the average pesticide used by these companies? And should we be concerned about water table contamination, as this is a direct source to the water table, or any other issues because there's such a big landowner who's doing so much large ag?
Yeah, good question.
Okay, question on RUPs. I'll just start off. I mentioned there are about 230 restricted use pesticides out of about 8,500, okay, in the total. The big users, of course, would be large ag, but also there's restricted use pesticides. A lot of your county water guys, okay, they're a big user, and I think that number showed up. So large ag, county water, and the pest control industry, the guys that fumigate your homes. No, I think it's the, I'd have to go back, give you information, but the sulfurylfluoride and the chloropicrin, because they treat the homes, the poundage is way up there, okay? And I think that was one entity. We focus on the ag, but not look at the total picture. But again, yeah, top three. But again, we look at are they following the label? The label is the law. And if they're not, and there's a complaint, we go find out. You know, again, because we only got 5 inspectors, we're not there to monitor these guys. We've got other type of inspections we have to do, neutral, to kind of spread it around.
Or limit the pesticides.
Which is going to be hard, because like I said, everyone is using that. But again, if you follow the label, we wouldn't be in this predicament.
So again, that second question being is 56% of state ag it kind of falls in the same category. If they're the largest state ag tenant and they're doing biotech and they're large ag, then there's large pesticide use coming from that.
Well, if you talk about numbers, perhaps, but they still have to, they cannot over-apply, okay? It's not because the volume they're using. If it's according to the label, then legally, yes, they can. So we need to get that straight and not kind of crucify them. They're the biggest user. Hey, again, I'm a regulator. You follow that label, you're okay. You don't follow that label, you're in trouble with us, right?
Just a quick follow-up on that. The ag, the termite companies, and state and county. The county of Kauai, it's all chlorine gas for water. A little bit on the golf course, but really it's chlorine to do the water. It's not all the multitude of other restricted use pesticides. And then the termite companies use like 1 or 2 main things. So that would be with restricted use pesticides. So the county, at first glance, the county looks like they're using a lot, but they're using it to purify the water. It's chlorine gas, and they're evolving away from that. It's not done where the wind's blowing and by homes and things.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming. I'm Lisa. Thank you, Gary Hooser, esteemed Gary Hooser. I wanted to talk a little bit about the precautionary principle and why I agree with Gary that it's a much wiser approach. When we do a risk-benefit analysis, I think that there are some flaws in that system, and I wish that we would consider some of the risks that are unknown factors. For example, the question is for you. Do we now know, or will we ever know, what the cost is associated with removing residual pesticides from plantation days? And if we were able to internalize that cost into our cost-benefit analysis, wouldn't we make different decisions about whether we choose to use pesticides that we don't really know enough about?
Thanks, Lisa. That was a great question. So we do know the cost. The Board of Water Supply knows the cost of what it takes, and we all pay for that cost in our water rates of what the technology and the maintenance required to strip legacy chemicals out of our drinking water. So the way that is done primarily is through carbon filtration. So from the well, for example, in central Oahu is some of our most contaminated water from agricultural chemicals historically. EDB, DVCP, alphabet soup that's down there, stuff that's been banned. But it's still there, and in fact, in some cases we're seeing continued elevated levels in the groundwater, even though it hasn't been used in 20 years. So it's still working its way down 1,000 feet from central Oahu down into the groundwater. So the Board of Water Supply needs to get these big carbon filtration canisters, basically, and at the wellhead, before that water goes into the drinking water system of the city, it has to pass through these carbon filters that pull out the organic chemicals. And that is very expensive. If you were following the news, a month ago with the Red Hill gas spill, that's an issue too, right? The military has these big gas tanks, and they have leaked into the groundwater, and they have, in small amounts, actually reached the Navy's drinking water system. And the Board of Water Supply wants to make sure that the Navy pays for cleaning up our drinking water if, in fact, those gas constituents get into the board water supply system. So it is very expensive. I think the analogy is that we have learned from that. Those chemicals were not regulated, now they are. Chemicals that are like those that persist. For example, the termiticides, if anybody grew up here and you termite treated your house for ground termites, it's chlordane and dieldrin. They're still there. They're in the groundwater in Manoa, and they're seeping into the city's sewer drains and getting the city in trouble because we can measure them as they go in the outfall out into the ocean. The city didn't put them there. Everybody who had their house termite treated in the 60s just pumped all this stuff into their yards to preserve their houses. Now that stuff is banned. Right? Things like that now, those chemicals need to go through tests to make sure that they aren't going to persist. And most of these chemicals, and I shouldn't say most, but maybe Tom, you could address it. The chemicals that are in use today that are approved for use are those that do not persist in the environment to the same degree that those old things did. Now, we can find them. We can find them in small amounts, but we can also measure them in our own lab. If I have a hot cucumber that was harvested and has pesticide residue above a threshold level, I'll take a cucumber next to it that was harvested at the same time. I'll wait a week, I'll test that one, and the level's lower, or maybe it's totally gone, depending on the chemical that you're using. Okay. So there's lots of different chemicals in there, but the ones that are banned are the ones that persist in dangerous levels that we know about for a long period of time. And the ones that are used are considered to be more safe because they don't persist as long. And the issue about, are we raising the standards? Are we allowing more and more of this stuff? In fact, it's the opposite. As more science comes out, the thresholds tend to go down lower and lower and lower.
They just raised the allowable level of glyphosate at the federal level of Roundup. I'm just saying.
Based on science about how it doesn't persist.
That's not true. Like France just found Monsanto guilty of lying about Roundup's biodegradability.
Okay. So this gets to the argument that was raised as well, that there's always competing science, right? For every study that finds something, the last sentence is likely to be, more study is required.
I'm just saying, generally, I'd like to think they're lowering the tolerance levels. I'm saying with Roundup in particular, that's considered to be benign. They just totally kicked up the allowable level. My Maui coordinator just tested her urine. She got 10.5 parts per billion in her urine. She's 75% organic and farms organic. I mean, that's the same as a farmer who sprayed Roundup that day with no gloves on. So it's just something to think about. Sorry.
Okay, I don't know if I need to address that.
Could you throw the cost out there? What, you have a number for me?
I'm sorry, I don't. I don't know that Board of Water Supply would have that. I know it's expensive. I can't tell you, of your water bill that you're paying, what percentage of that is maintaining the pipes, what is the electrical bill and pumping the water to your house, how much of that is the carbon filtration. I just don't know.
What about reverse osmosis?
Reverse osmosis is more expensive than carbon filtration, which is why we don't do it. Reverse osmosis will strip most everything out of your water, including the minerals that are essential for health.
I'm sorry to say that we are reaching the end of our time. We'll take one more question and
No,
then...
we have two.
Yes, I know they have been. So let's see if we can handle that. But we need to get out of here on time, clean up and so on. So with that, I just wanted to say you've been such a great group to participate with us, and we want to follow up. We have your names and stuff, so we'll try to follow up if we have an additional forum. And we do have some other business that we were hoping to conduct, but we'll try to put that online and make you informed about it. Mike, you want to come down?
I just want to ask ask a question. In terms of risk-benefit analysis, I think when I was a kid, you hear about cholera epidemics in Europe. And I was living in Florida at the time, and I said, well, why don't we have cholera? And they said, well, because we have chlorine in our water. Most people would judge the risk of drinking chlorine, a little chlorine in the water, well worth avoiding cholera. Now we've got, with global warming, we're going to have more disease vectors come into our islands, more things that we haven't had to face before. Like now we got the fire ant. If you've ever lived in a place where fire ants are endemic, you'll do anything to get rid of them, especially if you have kids or pets in your yard, because they can kill your dog. So looking forward to, if fire ants come to Oahu, you're going to see a lot of people, you're going to have to educate them.
It is here.
Yeah, they are here. So you got to educate people how to use the pesticides appropriately. And then looking forward to the future, to global warming, we're going to get the disease vector that carries malaria possibly. Then it's irresponsible not to control it. So are we planning for that? That's what I kind of want to ask. Are we planning for those future disease vectors and pests that are going to come here and being proactive about it?
Yeah. All right. As far as the pest, unless it shows up, I mean, we can't forecast that it will come here. We'll kind of deal with what is here. Little fire ant is here. We're trying to control the coconut rhinoceros beetle. That's another pest. And so as they show up, but I get involved with the different type of pesticide used to control it. It's another department that actually tries all different methods to locate, and right now they're in the eradication phase of the beetle.
Mike, you made a good point, and I think it's important to look at that perspective. And I was actually surprised. I hadn't thought about this either, but it's my friends who work in land conservation, trying to protect native species up in the conservation areas, who are among, or fighting the coqui frog or whatever. They're among the most vociferous that, properly used, these chemicals are an essential tool to protect the few remaining native species that we have in the watershed. So, it's a good point to raise. And on chlorine in the water, I really took this to my toxicologist, because if you look at your consumer confidence report, you're going to see these chlorine residuals. Everybody's going to get them. And those things are carcinogens. That's nasty stuff. You look at that, it's like, oh my God, there's carcinogens in my drinking water, because it's what's left over after you chlorinate it, the chlorination byproducts. But they're there to protect your health, to keep you from getting a worse illness. And so that's the complication that we often have to deal with from a policy standpoint. It's a great point you make.
Yeah. Thank you.
Last and probably least. A key issue in terms of pesticides, certainly it comes from a lot of the things that Gary Hooser was saying, I think has to do with GMOs in this sense. GMOs, as I understand it, were originally marketed as this is the way to reduce the pesticide load in agriculture throughout the United States and indeed throughout the world. Yet we find that the GMO experimenting that's going on, particularly on Kauai, is using vast quantities of pesticides to create, and this question sort of has a bunch of observations and ramifications. I see GMO crops as being a means to promote a scorched earth agriculture, where you use the pesticides to destroy every weed in sight and everything else, and your corn can grow. Scorched earth is the only thing that survives. What this is doing here and now in Hawaii, as I see it, is increasing vastly the total pesticide load that the island of Kauai, among others, is bearing or not being able to bear. And Tom Matsuda pointed out, I'm not saying he's in any way criticizing him for it, he's pointing out the law. The law is you read the label and do what the label says, you can do it. And there, in essence, is no limit on the quantity of pesticide that you can dump in the earth. And it seems to me that this entire state has to step back and say, what is an acceptable pesticide load? Even if, to pull from another quote from Gary, it's safe until it's not safe. I think that we have to operate on an understanding that just too much pesticide is too much. And we have to look at it that way, and I'm afraid that neither the Department of Agriculture, nor the Department of Health, nor anybody in the state is really focusing on this issue, the pesticide load. And related to that, I would say, we have certain large grower, companies that are really chemical companies that have branched out into seed growing. They're chemical companies. Monsanto is a chemical company that has branched out into seeds. The same for the other, DuPont. Chemical is our middle name, I think was their advertising slogan back in the 50s and 60s. I think we've got to step away from that, and I would suggest that perhaps another thing to do is concentrate those ag inspectors on the big companies with the huge pesticide usage. Quantity, not necessarily whether they're actually following the label or not. So it's a bunch of observations, and I would invite commenting. I think Gary Hooser has had to leave, but gentlemen, thank you.
Can I ask one quick question of both of you gentlemen? If you guys could step up to the mic, please. Okay, what is your knowledge of geoengineering weather control that's being done to our skies 24/7? This is why we're having this freakish weather, yeah? That's being carried out by the military, the CIA, and Monsanto. What do you know about that? Google and YouTube.
Nothing at all.
We Google and YouTube, this is our health.
Okay.
This is barium and aluminum that is being poured into our skies. I have videos of the planes doing it. You guys have to educate yourself. This is massive spraying around the world, not only this going on here. Yeah?
Okay.
Please look into that. Wow.
Yep.
I think that's all the time we have, and
I'm
I
happy
think
to hang around afterwards.
we've actually raised more questions than we've been able to answer, but we need to find a way to continue this conversation, and we can do some of that outside as we clean up and make this ready for school tomorrow.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for coming.
To genetically modified organisms. Well, we don't need no genetically modified organisms. My friends gotta say no to GMO. Oh yeah, to GMO. Now listen. Well, you may be asking yourself, how does this affect my health? Most people eating GMO and they don't even know. Monsanto's the same company using Roundup, Agent Orange, and PCB. Their products causing cancer, my friends, they're not the answer. Not the answer. Now what are the steps we take to help to correct this mistake? First thing we can do is tell them, label our food. Don't be so rude, don't be so rude. The next thing we could do, tell Kamehameha School, remember Kanaka Maoli, Hawaiian sovereignty. Set the people free, set the people free. Let's put our faith in the natural way. Forget your chemicals and your pesticide spray. Educate yourself for the children of today. 'Cause food grown organic and pure will always be the #1 cure. You'll all be grateful when you say no to GMO. Gotta say no to GMO. Tell you what it stands for. Genetically modified organisms. My friend, I don't wanna be no genetically modified organism. Well, I'll tell him now. Pure organic. Now Monsanto and other big name corporations are planning to take over the food and seed crop production so that all crops will be genetically modified. But in Hawai'i, there's something that we can do about this. We must continually encourage Kamehameha schools to evict Monsanto from the land because they are polluting the land and poisoning the people. We must ask ourselves, everybody, do we really want to be a genetically modified organism? Promoting local organic food from the heart, from the soul, with love. Aloha. It's time to educate, here to communicate. Yes, it's our health at stake. My friends, don't be blinded. Oh no. They're taking over the land. It's time we make our stand. It's time you know about companies like Monsanto. Oh no, oh no. Polluting with chemical spray, poisoning waters day after day. Kamehameha school said they could stay because they pay our way, our way. Now look at the long-term effect when it's the land you neglect. The ahupua's been a wreck and you're looking for your paycheck. Where's the respect? Where's the respect?